I think the misconception is that a ghostwriter does all the heavy lifting. They do enough of it so that the process is not entirely painful to you.
That is Becca Braun, an innovator and writer whose longtime passion is capturing the voices of executives, entrepreneurs, and others in new and interesting ways. Becca is an alum of Harvard College and Harvard Business School and the president of Braun Ink, a ghostwriting firm that writes action-packed executive biographies and memoirs. You can learn more about Becca's firm on their website, braunink.com, and that's BRAUNINK, and link is in the show notes. Hello, Becca. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Becca, what are some common misconceptions about ghostwriting?
Oh, good question, Will. I would say that one of the biggest misconceptions is that it will be easier if you use a ghostwriter, and in general, that the process of writing a memoir is easy because it feels, and in some ways is, less research-driven than, an academic work or something like that. But what I would say about working with a ghostwriter to write your memoir is that it's still quite a lot of work. It is every person. We've written about 20 of these so far for individuals, and they've all said it is more work than I thought. And they say that even when we warn them up front and say there's going to be more work than you thought it would be. We hear that consistently from people. It's still more work than they thought, because at the end of the day, we cannot get into your voice quickly or easily. That takes a lot of time. And ultimately, over the course of 6 to 12 months, we still are never going to fully have or get your voice. You have your voice. And so you're going to have to edit a lot and work with us a lot and have a lot of patience and that type of thing. So I think the misconception is that a ghostwriter does all the heavy lifting. They do enough of it so that the process is not entirely painful to you, but ultimately it is more work than people think. And a lot of fun too, by the way. I didn't mean to make it sound all work. It's a lot of fun too, and they always say they're so glad they did it. They just didn't know how much work it would be.
Yeah, that would have been one of my misconceptions. I would have thought, well, I'm hiring someone, they're going to take the load off. Let's backtrack a little bit and talk about how you got started. And you were writing on the side, doing some ghost writing for executive speeches.
Yes.
Tell us about that, and then how did that develop into your current business? And tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah, that's a good question too. So I'm a big advocate of the side hustle, which is, moonlighting, the side hustle, whatever you want to call it. And I had been a co-founder of and was president of Jumpstart Ventures, which is a nonprofit seed and angel investing firm in Northeast Ohio. And I was doing that job, and that was, as you can imagine, a pretty full-time job. We were high velocity investors. So that was a pretty full-time job. And I had 4 young kids, ages, they're now 17, 15, 13, and 11, but at the time they were about 10 years younger. So in any case, I loved writing. I was a linguistics major in college. I was a journalist. I really loved writing. And I loved business. And so I wanted to combine writing and business. And so I had a side hustle about 8 hours a week, ghostwriting speeches for CEOs. And I was very consistent. I did, 8 hours a week, every week. I did these speeches for different CEOs. And one of them asked me.
What kind of speeches? That's an interesting thing in itself. Like what kind of speeches would a CEO be giving that they would engage you for?
Oh, I love these things. It was CEOs, it was chairmen, chair people, largely, for better or worse, chairmen. But in any case, these were speeches to all employees. So companies have employees around the country, around the world. And these were often, on screens throughout the world, live streamed or televised or whatever. And so there were those types of speeches. There were chairperson remarks at different events. It wasn't really investor relations per se, because most companies have investor relations departments if they're of the size to have public investors. But it was speeches or remarks at events that investors might attend as opposed to investor relations or might be in attendance at. It was, boy, we did all kinds of things. Conferences where customers would be present. And I frequently worked with members of the marketing department. But the marketing departments, they're so overloaded and so overwhelmed that actually trying to get into the voice of the CEO or any executive, again, it was C-level executives, but trying to get into that voice was not something they had time for. They just don't have time. They need to outsource that and say, can you pull up the words this executive used 3 speeches ago? And can you pull up these images? And can you interview, go find some documents? So that's the type of thing that I just loved to do, was to find that cadence, find those words, find that syntax, find everything that is particular to that executive.
And I imagine that you would have some conversations with the executive about, like, broadly what they wanted to say and what they wanted to talk about.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, the closest work was with the executive herself or himself, but I worked also with marketing departments. And, it takes a village to create a good speech. And so, yes, it was quite a few meetings and discussions with a CEO and quite a few drafts and many instances, in fact, I would say more often than not, where they sent lots of the draft remarks back to the cutting room floor. Executives are like anybody, but they're pretty demanding. And they were not subtle about saying, you have to have a thick skin to do almost anything in life. You have to have a thick skin, because they're not subtle about saying this isn't good enough and it's not working. So keep going. So that's why it was mornings, evenings, lunch times, and that type of thing.
Fascinating. We could have a whole show about that. Maybe we'll get you back to talk about speeches, but let's continue on. So you're writing these speeches, and then that evolved into this, business eventually of really writing memoirs for executives. Tell us about how all that happened.
So one of the CEOs that I was writing for said, would you be interested in or willing to ghostwrite my memoir? And the first couple times I said, no, I just don't have time. I'm working at Jumpstart. I have a full-time job. I have a family. I just don't have time to do that, unfortunately. So I can't do it. But he was in no hurry. He was a former CEO. He was older. He was in no hurry by any means. And so finally I got the 3rd or 4th request from him to ghostwrite his memoir. And I was ready to leave Jumpstart. The reason is it was a nonprofit, and ultimately I went and got my MBA because fundamentally, as much as I think that capitalism has a long way to go to be the type of system we want it to be, and I have many issues with capitalism, it's the best system out there, unfortunately. It's the best. If there was something better, I would love it. And so I really, in getting my MBA, really believe in the for-profit system, and I wanted to go back to a for-profit world. And so I was ready to leave Jumpstart, and I needed that jumping off point, and that's why the side hustle is so good. And so I said to him that 3rd or 4th time that he asked, you know what, let's do it. And so I had a 12-month contract with him to ghostwrite his memoir. And we had so much fun doing it. I mean, I did not think I would have that much fun writing a book for someone to tell their story. And it was personal and it was professional. And from there, his other CEO buddies, there's like a CEO club, I think. The CEO buddy, a couple of them read it and they said, oh, I'd love to do that too. So we just started writing more of these stories for CEOs. But again, these were limited print edition. And maybe in a few moments, we'll talk about the books that are more for public consumption. But these were limited print edition, just CEOs telling their stories just for kicks and giggles.
So they would distribute it, I imagine, to their friends and family and maybe internally to the company so they could understand the origin story of the company.
That's exactly right. It was all over the map in terms of what their limited distribution plan was for their limited print edition. But by and large, it was friends, family, colleagues, internal to the workplace, or sometimes donated to a nonprofit where people could get the book and were asked to make a donation to get the book and that type of thing. So it's been, across the board. Yep.
So what's involved in writing one of these? And, maybe a double-barreled question. I'm curious if you have sort of almost a standardized structure, like childhood, talk about, entry into the business. And is there kind of some sort of standardized structure that you typically do? And tell us a little bit about that whole process of
Yeah,
creating one of
yeah.
these books.
Sure. So typically a book takes a memoir, a ghostwritten memoir takes about 12 months to research and write, and then about 6 months to produce, which involves design, administrative, getting Library of Congress numbers, getting ISBN numbers if you want those, which are the little barcodes you see on the backs of books, even though these are limited print edition. Those are the types of things you do, and then to produce in different formats like ebook, et cetera. So there's 12 months to write and 6 months to produce for us. As far as the standardized process or actual structure of the product, the process is typically interviewing and then drafting, and it is just a classic. It's just the grind. It's just doing the interviews is an awful lot of fun. I just love that part. I mean, you are deeply learning from other people's successes and mistakes in life and in business when you do these interviews. And, we do maybe start out with maybe 15 hours of interviews. And then over the course of about 5 drafts of the book, we conduct another, let's say, on average, 15 to 20 hours of interviews. And then we do research. These are fairly research heavy for us. We like to not only fact check, but surround a story with research of what was the context, what was going on. So that's quite a bit of research. And then we just complete a final draft and we get it proofread and designed and everything else. And we work with 100% contractors who have specialties in all the different areas of book writing, research, production. So as far as the actual structure of a book, I generally divide a book, because I'm a pretty structured thinker, creative but structured, into style, substance, and structure. And they all should have a beautiful, for lack of a better word, a beautiful synergy. You don't structure a book creatively just to structure it creatively, just because you want to be sort of creative. You structure it creatively because that structure aligns with the substance of the book and it aligns with that person's style. So I can try to give an example. We had one where a fellow wrote a book about his late wife, and it's a beautiful story. She grew up utterly impoverished, and impoverished because her mother had died, and her father had unfortunately succumbed to alcoholism. So the story talks about how nobody knew in her sort of society friends. She became a fairly well-to-do woman. Nobody knew about her past and about her needing to sort of reconcile with her past. And so we structured it where we told the front story, the main story, the main current day narrative or contemporary narrative. And then, of course, alternated that. We sort of wove in and alternated in from her childhood. So each chapter, every other chapter would progress her childhood, and every other chapter would progress her adulthood. But where they met was at the moment when she found her father for the first time in 25 years or something as an adult. And he was unfortunately still a degenerate, but she reconciled with him. And she was Catholic, and so there's that notion of reconciliation in the Catholic Church anyhow. And so the book is about reconciliation, and the chapters led up to structurally that reconciliation moment. I know that's a long example. My point being, we didn't just do that because we wanted to be creative and alternate chapters. We did it because the substance led us to that point.
Having produced now about 20 of these biographies of successful, business people. What are some of the themes that have emerged for you, or anything surprising emerging for you?
Yes, I would say after about the fifth one, a very clear, and again, this is not statistical, it's anecdotal, because 20 is hardly enough. It's not like Good to Great, the book that's highly statistical about what, for instance, makes a great CEO or separates a great CEO from a average CEO. So it's not statistical. But what I would say is after about the fifth one, each of these people has really, I would say, an epiphany in their adolescence, in their age 13 to 20, 22 time period, when they realize they want to become an achiever. And that struck me because each of them talks about it. They don't say, "This is my epiphany." They don't use those words. They don't say, "I wanted to become an achiever." They don't use those words. But each of them, whether they're rich or poor, whether they were good at school or not good at school, it doesn't matter. They each, and since then, I've noticed that I'd say 90% of the time, I hear about that story sometime between age 13 and 22, where they just realized I wanted to really do something with myself, with my life. So that is one. And then the second one that has struck me, and this is very much by virtue of the primary people we've written books for, where fundamentally, as much as I'd like you to believe that we're global and that we're big everything, every market is local. And so I'd say 60 to 70% of the people we've written for have primarily been Cleveland area, Ohio business people. Not all of them, but 60 to 70%. So this is very particular to that. But these stories, these people, the separation of church and state that took place between the businessmen and their wives is stunning. And in some ways, I know this sounds crazy in today's day and age, but in some ways, it is beautiful. And I do talk with their wives. It's beautiful because it's clear. And today we have so much less clarity. But the wives are as strong. I just was under the impression, because I didn't grow up with that much of an executive parent, I was really under the impression that the wives of these executives were perhaps a little bit more quiet or whatever. They were strong, strong, strong about what they did to raise their family. The executives were never around. It was absolute commitment to growing whatever company they were at, absolute, complete commitment to it, 70 hours a week and weekends. And the wives, 100%, the wives raised these families. They dealt with the difficulties of the kids. They dealt with, all of the family stuff. And the strength these women had and have was incredible. And the clarity of the separation of duties. I just, in some ways, I have a different marriage and a different family. My husband and I are very equal on working and raising kids. And I'm hip to that jive. But there's something really incredible about that clarity they had and the strength that clarity could bring on.
What a powerful observation. And on that first observation, how did that manifest itself? How do people express that sometime in their teen years they decided that they wanted to really make something of their lives?
Yeah.
How did that come out?
Let's see. I'm trying to think of some good examples, and I'm walking in my office here to look at some of the book spines to come up with some good examples. But I think there's a fellow who became a renowned doctor, the head of a major unit of Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and did more transplants than heart and lung transplants than any other doctor in history at the time, and that type of thing. In any case, he decided that he was Jewish, and he faced some discrimination, and he faced it in his teen years, and it made him really angry. And he decided that he was going to make something of himself so that he didn't face that discrimination again. So that was an example. He ended up going to Yale at a time when the now well-known Jewish quota existed. And he also found out a bit about that. And that additional discrimination made him pretty angry. And so there's that example where anger drove his desire to achieve, and unfortunately, discrimination. Then there was another one who was sort of a little bit sickly as a child, and he ended up becoming the chairman of Standard Oil of Ohio. But he was a little bit sickly as a child, and so he didn't compete athletically with the other boys. And he could have just sort of gone an average route in school. He was neither super smart or super academic. And I think he just came home one day, and I don't recall. He looked around and just said, I don't feel like being the sickly child anymore. I don't feel like being not noticed anymore. And he just started going to his room and studying a lot more. He's, these kids that you would see in high school, any of us would see in high school, who all of a sudden they just start to nail it. He sounded like he was that kind of person. Like, I don't know if you had any of those in your high school. I have teen kids, so we were actually talking about that general topic the other day. One of my kids said somebody came into school, like somebody this year suddenly seems to be just working really hard and answering a lot of questions and doing really well. So anyhow, it sounds like this fellow who I wrote for, he just did that. He just decided, I don't feel like being mediocre anymore. World War II for some of these people, I've written for some significantly older people. World War II tended to have a strong motivation to people if they served in World War II, or then they came back and, they went off at about age 18, right? Some of them came back at about age 21. And I said these epiphanies were generally between 13 and 22. And so a couple of them, came back. One of them had the epiphany, in fact, on a boat in the North Atlantic when he thought they were going to die. So it was the sort of death epiphany.
Yeah.
And just decided that he was not going to. He decided in that moment, he absolutely thought they were going to die. I can't remember the specifics. It was a torpedo. It was something. He also was in D-Day after that. But in any case, he was on the bridge or something, and he thought they were going to die. And he just said he had grown up with great fortune, and he said he couldn't squander that great fortune. He was a fortunate, wealthy young man, and he just decided, if I get out of this, I am not going to squander the good fortune I've had. I'm going to really make something of myself. I'm sorry, I'm answering questions so long, but
no, it's great. So it must be just such an amazing experience to have the time to really delve into lives the way you do. Tell us a little bit now about the kind of the new, more branded product line published for a general audience or a public audience, and tell us a little bit about that you have coming out.
Sure. So we're launching what we're calling, my company is called Braun Ink, INK, and we're launching what we're calling the Braun Collection, which is a collection or a content library of books and companion products for a business student and business professional audience. So these are action-packed, character-driven memoirs and biographies by and about and of CEOs of mid-sized companies around the globe, and telling their stories. It's their life stories, but concentrated primarily on growing their businesses. And these are for business students and professionals. So the idea is, did you go to business school, Will? I can't remember.
I did. I went to Columbia Business School.
Oh, look at you. So if you, in many business environments, you learn through the case method, case studies, and those are situational examples. And after reading a case study, you will pull out in my era, it was your HP 12C calculator, or your Lotus 123 spreadsheet, or you might pull out your Excel spreadsheet or whatever. But you figure out, should we invest in that new plant in India or whatever it is? And these are intended to be different. They're intended to be instead of a situational case study, a biographical case study. So the books are ebooks, and you can also get a printed book if you want, but the main format is an ebook. It's a pretty quick read. It's 125 pages, so that takes about 3 hours to read. And then they come with, you can buy instead of the book or in addition to the book, because we know people's attention spans don't even reach 2 to 3 hours. You can buy a presentation, like $1.99 to get a presentation. You can get a short video, 4-minute video, all summarizing what's in the book. You can get a chapter summary and study guide. You can get an individual chapter covering a certain specific topic or issue. And if you'd like, I can tell you about the first book we'll launch, but you can get a conference call with the CEO who wrote the book.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So lots of different companion products. We'll have about 8 different companion products.
That's
for
very
the
cool.
books.
Because it's so, you sort of hear about a few well-known, CEO names, and I'm not going to mention them because I try to avoid mentioning the cliched, names that we all hear. But it's not as often that you get to hear about just sort of the ordinary, average, kind of not the Fortune 3, but the CEO of a mid-sized company who had a, real significant career, but not kind of globally famous, and bringing those stories to life sounds such a cool thing. Where can people go to find more? And I know we're almost out of time here. So where can people go to find out more about your firm and to look into, finding out about these products?
So they can go to braunink.com. That's INK, BRAUNINK.com. And we just have a placeholder page right now for Braun Collection. However, that will be not a placeholder anymore in about 3 weeks, so towards the end of March.
Okay, so probably actually when this episode comes out, that page should be live, and the link will be in the show notes. Becca, I would love to continue this discussion, and maybe we can do a follow-up episode to hear more about speeches. Really wanted to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I think it's a great idea, and you did a great job, and you're a good friend. So thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman. If you like the show, I invite you to subscribe to the weekly Unleashed email, where you'll get summaries of each recent episode, book recommendations, and consulting tips. To sign up, go to askunleashed.com or just shoot me an email at unleashed@umbrex.com. And if you'd like to review the show on iTunes, that would be awesome, particularly if you want to give it 5 stars. Otherwise, don't bother. Thanks for listening.